All right, today we are, you're listening to the Mind Body Mushroom, where warriors, seekers, and rebels explore the front lines of healing. I'm your host, Jordan Ryan. From combat to consciousness, we dive into real stories, ancient wisdom, and the forgotten tools that help us reclaim our minds, our health, and our power. This show is made possible by Wind and Sea Coffee, our line of adaptogen-infused blends crafted for resilience, clarity, and performance. If you want to support the mission, visit windandseacoffee.com. Today, we're honored to welcome a true advocate for healing and resilience, Rob Sanderson. Rob is the founder and director of SWEL, which stands for Surf Waves Enjoy Life, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting veterans and first responders. After serving over 2 decades as a police officer, Rob recognized the profound need for mental health support among our nation's heroes. Through SWEL, he combines his passion for surfing with a mission to help others decompress, disconnect, and reinvigorate. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jordan. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, man. Thank you for coming on. So you guys were here in San Diego. When was that? A couple weeks ago?
Yeah. First weekend in April.
First weekend.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about what you guys were doing and what that event was.
Yeah. So, when we founded, we're always looking to form communities with other organizations that are like-minded, maybe have the same kind of core mission to serve. And through that, we found 3 other organizations that support military and first responders. That's Pendleton Surf Club, One More Wave, Veteran Service Alliance, and then us. And really, we wanted to come together. For last year was the first year to just have a camping surfing trip with all the leadership and members and just kick it and see what we could do to collaborate with one another to kind of support each other. Because like I said, we do basically the same core things, but we do things a little bit differently. And it was really cool to see the support really kind of forming a coalition around what we're trying to accomplish. And, it's that whole tribe mentality, stronger together.
Right. Yeah. And how would you say that you do things like differently than some of those other organizations, or where's the what's SWELL's flavor of it?
Yeah, I certainly don't want to speak to the other missions because I'm sure I'd dork it up somehow. But SWELL's unique in the fact that we're bringing a lot of people that are not on the coast or really familiar with surfing from all over the nation. We bring them out to generally Huntington Beach on the West Coast, and they get 4 days of surfing, community meals. They kind of live together in the same Airbnb beach house. We do breath work, a little bit of yoga, and just provide them with some tools. We've got a expert in self-care who spoke with you not too long ago, Matt Domyancic.
Yeah.
That comes out and gives a talk. And it's really organic. So it's kind of a peer support function, really. And then obviously with that, we surf and they're partnered with, the participants are partnered with either an active duty service member, a veteran, or first responder as their surf coach for the weekend.
Yeah. Now, does SWEL kind of focus primarily on first responders as opposed to like the veteran and military side, or is that not really a distinction?
Yeah, it's not really a distinction. I would say for our mission in particular, there's a lot of bleed over, right? Between a lot of active duty firefighters and police officers that are veterans. And we have done veteran only trips that aren't first responders. So it's kind of a mixed bag, really. So we don't really distinguish. And, the traumas are very different as far as when you talk about acute trauma being in military and a very action packed deployment versus, 20 years of kind of cumulative traumas with some acute sprinkled in there too. But the effect's the same when it goes to our program.
Right. Yeah. No, tell me a little bit about your background. I knew that you worked in law enforcement, but I really don't know like much about your history. So what's the Sanderson origin story?
Yeah, it was wild. I grew up Navy brat. So my dad was a fighter pilot. Always admired men and women in uniform. I always knew I wanted to serve. I actually went through Marine Corps OCS, met a lot of nice corpsmen there because I got hurt a lot.
Yeah.
The last couple of days I was at OCS. I ended up having such a bad blood infection through the blisters in my heels. They're like, dude, you're out of here. You gotta come back next year.
No way. Wow.
Yeah. So in the middle of that period of time 9/11 happened, and I was like, man, I need to get out there and I need to serve. And I did a ride along with a buddy of mine who was a cop, and I remember my dad calling me the morning of 9/11. He was like, asked me a really crazy question that kind of caught me off guard. And he's like, "What are you going to do about this? Like, we just got attacked. What are you going to do about this? You're the
Wow.
next generation."
Wow.
And so yeah, so went to the police academy in 2002. Started my career in '03 in Gulfport, Mississippi, of all places. It's a
Oh, wow.
wild story how I wound up there. Never even been to Mississippi till I started the academy, but ended up down there and worked on the Gulf Coast for 4 years. It was a good time, man. It was back when you know the community respected the officers for the most part, and the bad guys, there was like a mutual respect where they understood what was coming if they acted up,
Right.
and we treated everybody with respect. I'd like to say.
Right.
And then Katrina hit. We got blown pretty hard core down there when it came to damage. We actually had more storm damage than New Orleans, but you know, clearly they had a larger population, more media attention. So we were about 45 minutes east of there. And after that, I spent, like 6 months straight of just storm recovery, right? So I think I worked 48 days straight of 16-hour shifts without a day off. And then
Wow.
6 months, like 5 days a week, like 12 to 16-hour shifts. Did a lot of crazy stuff, flying around in helicopters, doing food drops, did a lot of body recovery. In the middle of that, they sent police officers kind of from all over that came to help us out, and firefighters and you name it, federal agencies. And I was recruited from an agency that came down to work with us to come up to Kansas City to work. And so about 9 months after Katrina, moved up to Kansas City again. Never even been to Kansas City.
Really?
Could probably even point it out on a map, to be honest with you, other than aim for the center of the U.S., furthest away from the coast. And had a great career up there. Did everything from pedaling a bicycle throughout the streets, catching bad guys that way, and spent 4 years undercover operations. Bought a lot of dope for DEA and FBI. That was fun, and even just the little local jokers. And I ended up with a back injury and retiring in 2020, and then spent the next few years as a civilian, managing civilian staff for a buddy of mine who got a chief job up here in the metro.
Interesting. Now, you said something about, you know, back in the day, or like, you know, kind of around the time that you joined, there was more of like a mutual respect for law enforcement, and even a mutual sort of like acknowledgement between, you know, the bad guys and cops as well. How do you see that has sort of changed over time? Like, what's been your perspective, and what do you think could be driving that?
Yeah, so I think it's more than just looking at those two um, factions
Yeah.
in a vacuum. I think it's a societal change. Like, we just have less respect for one another,
Mm.
period, and differing point of views. Like, it was weird. Like, I think I called bad guys
Yeah.
back then could see things through the lens of what I was doing and trying to accomplish. And then, like, vice versa. There was like common ground, regardless
Hmm.
of where we sat.
Right.
And as long as you weren't over the top disrespectful one way or the other, either the bad guy or the cops, like, there's generally, you could get along pretty well. And for some reason, you know, there's a number of reasons. I don't want to say for some reason. I don't
Yeah.
want to point them out and get political, but there's been erosion of that throughout society, of just, you know, mutual respect, empathy on both sides, and just perspective.
Right. Right. Yeah, that totally makes sense. It does seem that like, well, you know, and on top of that, again, not to like to get too political, but you know, I don't mind kind of going to some of these. It seems like there's been a form of like weaponized incompetence, you know, regarding, like, you know, I mentioned earlier before we started recording, I had a squatter in a house that I bought, you know, for rent, you know, to rent out, and this dude was going through a divorce, or said he just got divorced, was looking for a place to stay. You know, I was looking for a month-to-month contract. I kind of like drew it up, drew up a lease, rented it out, and within 1 month of him moving in there, he stopped paying and sort of, you know, absolutely wrecked the place. And you don't, you want, as a citizen of your city, you look to law enforcement and the judicial system and a lot of these other systems that are meant to keep society ordered. In one like Mad Max realm, you go with pipes and start beating this guy for stealing your house, basically. But we don't want to live in that type of anarchy, right? You want to be able to, you know, we live in a system of laws and
Well, you pay
norms.
taxes, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what we pay taxes for. It's what we, but so what the step typically from there, since it's a civil situation, is you go and you evict him. You post some notices, hey, 3-day notice to pay or quit, 10-day notice to pay or quit. Then you file an unlawful detainer, and this kind of is the process. But I guess what I learned through this horrible process, in some states they do it better than others. Like, for example, I've heard in like Texas and in Florida, even New Mexico, where I'm from, it's a 10-day process, and you file some paperwork, and within 10 days, if the person's still there and hasn't paid, the sheriff comes out and locks them out of the house, and that's it. It's 2 weeks maybe of an ordeal. It took me 6 months, and at what I learned through this whole thing was that during COVID, when everything kind of closed down, they closed down all of these eviction courts as well. Meanwhile, there was an eviction moratorium, right? So they were making it to where you couldn't evict people because they didn't want people to be evicted because they lost their job and they couldn't pay rent. Like, I guess it's coming from a good place. But then after they opened up the world and got all these eviction courts, they only opened one eviction court for the city of San Diego. And there's a backlog of 4 years of evictions that needed to take place. And so if you're somebody, if you're a bad guy, I guess, if you're somebody who is trying to weaponize this situation, all of these things, just as far as you can push it, just like right where that realm is, where the system that is meant to protect order actually protects disorder and injustice, and then
100%. The
yeah,
dude got 6 months of free rent
yeah,
off of you, and the
6
only one
months of
hurting
free
that is
rent,
you.
and then
Yeah.
since I'm the greedy homeowner, I had to go hire attorneys to do this, but the city pays for his attorneys, because he's like a low income person, whatever, and so it's like my property taxes are defending him against, getting my house back. And you see this and you're like, dude, this just feels so backwards. Like, I'm all
Yeah.
for, you don't want some like a single mom who like loses her job and 3 days later her, landlord kicks her out on the street. Like, I understand like the need to have protections, and not everyone is like a nice person, but at the same time, it's like the fabric of society starts, disintegrating when you make it to where this weaponized incompetence, that's kind of how I see it. Um, but moving into,
That's a lot, man.
yeah, I
I feel
mean,
like we should give you a hug.
dude, I mean, we're way past this. We've gotten
Yeah.
it, handled and whatever. But it's just one of those things that like I've seen in my own life, because we're all kind of like, you see stories on the news, and you have people from Kansas, they'll be like, oh, San Francisco is such a shithole. I'm like, have you ever been to San Francisco? Like, you know what I mean?
Beautiful.
Like, do you,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
does kind of raise to the level of like, these are culture war political stories, but it's only once it kind of enters your life. You're a defund the police person until your car gets stolen, and then you're like, well, calling the police, what do you mean there's not enough officers to send out to the, like, well, yeah, it's like, it's a nice tagline until you need someone to come help you. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I think the problem's just getting worse too,
Hmm.
because for the last, I don't know, you name it, 8 or so years, we've really beat down uh, public servants pretty awfully. I mean, law enforcement in the forefront, but even firefighters feel it too, right?
Really?
And now it's like, who wants to do the job? Because you don't make a lot of money. I mean, and the risk is real, you
Right.
know?
Right.
And so when you don't have a lot of applicants that want to do that job, you're starting to scrape the bottom of the barrel, and the problem's just going to perpetuate. So you're, and I, there are really great people out there that still want to do that job, and they're just as good of an applicant as I was. But I tell you this, they're also hiring people that don't need to be doing this job. And so you're going to see, in my opinion, a lot of these issues get even worse when it comes to lack of training, knowledge, just capabilities of handling stressful situations or nutty people or violent people.
Right.
We're not recruiting the highest quality folks right now, which is unfortunate. And so we're starting to see that now with call volumes stacking.
Really?
I know in Kansas City, if you call 911 at times, you'll be on hold for 30 minutes regardless of what's going on, because there's not enough people to answer the calls.
Wow.
And there's not enough cops to go to them.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a real problem. Any big city, I'm sure, out there on the West Coast is no different.
Have you thought about, have you ever hypothesized like what would be a solution to this? You know what I mean? Did you pay cops more? Do you like what is sort of, does that even affect the
Yeah,
situation?
I think that's one part of it, right? And this is not coming from anything other than my perspective of one little guy.
Of course.
I'm not saying this is a solution, but I feel like if you made a national standard, right, of like very similar to the military as far as fitness standards, education standards, training standards. And I'm not saying the military does it great, but at least there's like a standard. Whereas a cop here in Kansas City is going to get judged by a cop that's in Oklahoma, and who knows what their standards are, because I can tell you right now they're vastly different when it comes to educational training hours for continuing education. And you have very professional departments and you have very unprofessional departments. And the cop that is at the professional department is getting judged by the actions across the nation of somebody that isn't. So I think that's the start of it, right? And then if we can make it to, this is probably a poor example now, given the political rhetoric, but like the FBI is held in high regard, the DEA or whatever, these federal organizations. If we can boost local law enforcement to that level, whether it comes to mirroring pay, but also training and expectations, I think eventually you're going to wash some people out, but you're going to build a higher standard. And I think the other thing we need to do is we need to minimize the amount of crap that they send us on, right? Mental health calls, certainly, if there's a weapon involved and there's imminent threat of bodily harm, but the local cop is just the catch-all for anything that doesn't fit the box.
Right.
So we're wasting a ton of time on that. And we're also putting them in a bad position and also the citizens in a bad position. And you can just list the number of unfortunate uses of force that have related into killings that possibly could have been prevented. I'm not pointing out just one, but there's multiple.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think an aspect of that too is that, like, you got to think that police are generally intervening in somebody's worst day. You know what I mean? Like it's if the cops are dealing with you, it's not because it's a bake sale. It's like something's going on, and over the course of a career, the amount, it's like like you get a new car and then you see that car everywhere you go, like it's that bias. So it's like if your daily interaction with strangers is skewing towards, it's going to be a negative interaction, I feel like that kind of bleeds into interactions that maybe aren't so bad and that you might come out with a different perspective, but you're kind of loaded in the back of your mind going like, hey, like this person could have a weapon, all of these kind of triggers that exist in those interactions, and that, using that as like a segue into what I want to talk about next. How do you think that contributes to burnout?
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing is exactly what I saw throughout my career. It's those officers that are constantly in that sympathetic response to where they're hyper vigilant and they just assume the worst.
Right.
Not only that, but they've already completely overfilled their bucket with giving a shit. So to show empathy to another person, regardless of the circumstances, is just not within them.
Right.
And that's a shame. And really, that boils down to a lack of positive outlet, a lack of emotional intelligence, a lack of training, and probably a lack of self-care. Not probably, definitely a lack of self-care.
Yeah. Totally.
And at times, especially after Katrina, I found myself doing the same thing. So I'm not sitting here on my soapbox pretending like I was never in that kind of maxed out mode, because I was.
Right.
And it creeps up on you, and you don't really understand that it's there until you experience it, and then it takes a level of emotional intelligence to recognize it, because some people never snap out of that.
Right. It's like even if you had the best applicants under the best conditions over, with the best training, it's like, if you're not kind of addressing and deconflicting these mechanisms that are causing that, it's like no one is above that. You can't exist in that sympathetic nervous fight or flight stage forever, and if you're not allowing for re-regulation, like it's going to creep up on anyone.
Yeah. So what do? We make them work more overtime.
Yeah.
We make them drink fucking energy drinks.
Right.
Slam nicotine.
Right.
Zero downtime, and it just constantly makes the problem, even worse. And yeah, I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah.
Other than surfing.
Surf therapy. I mean, that seems to be. So, how did you kind of get into surf therapy? Where was it? I mean, as somebody who's, doesn't live by the coast, where did that kind of enter your consciousness?
Yeah. So it didn't start off surf therapy. As a matter of fact, when I started SWEL, I had no idea what surf therapy was. Even as we were starting. I grew up surfing, and I constantly made surf trips all over to meet buddies. I kind of cut my teeth on the Texas Gulf Coast, which, yes, there's actually surf there. Yeah. Is it good? Rarely, but it's fun. So yeah, when I moved to Kansas City, I was just constantly making trips to go see our mutual friend, Reggie.
Yeah.
And he was in the Coast Guard, and he'd be stationed, different locations, whether it be San Diego or LA or wherever. We'd meet out in Costa Rica. And so I just knew when I came back from those surf trips, whether they be quarterly or every couple of months, I just felt better. Again, ignorant to surf therapy or what it was doing. I just know when I came back, I was like, man, I just, like, my bucket was emptied. I had that kind of capacity to take on more crap. And so I started taking friends of mine that had never been, that were either veterans, first responders, or both, with me. And I started to see like a real change in them too. And I was like, man, I wonder if there might be something here. And kind of simultaneously, I'd been interacting with a group that does equine therapy for veterans and first responders here in Kansas City. And I was like, man, I wonder if we could, put together some sort of nonprofit and just fund these trips for these guys to come out with us, meet up with Reggie and Adam and everybody, and we'll just go surf. And so that's kind of how it kicked off. We started our paperwork in like 2019, and then made our first trip in 2020.
That's interesting. Yeah, I wonder. I want to ask you if you think that because surf therapy doesn't feel like therapy, you know what I mean? Like, people think of these like medical interventions, or it's like it's somebody with a master's or a PhD and this, and you got to be in like a clinic or a clinical setting. Like, these are very obviously relaxed settings. It's like it's people hanging out at the beach and going surfing. It's kind of a two-part question. So on one hand, I could see that makes it very approachable because it's like, not in that setting. But I wonder if that also prevents it from being taken seriously by precincts and, maybe these larger organizations writ large, because they're assuming that the type of help needs to be given from a doctor, kind of deal. What have you noticed?
Yeah, so I mean, those are two great points, and we recognize that very early on. So when we were just trying to convince people to
Mm.
go to the Pacific Ocean with us,
Yeah.
we never talked about therapy.
Right.
Never mentioned it. Just said, hey, we want to take you out, go surfing. It's going to be a good time. You can relax, and we're going to cover all the costs. Just kick back. And so, given the amount of effort they would need to put into it, other than just taking some days off from work, the lift was pretty light for them. They just had to be willing to go. So that's how we kind of continued to sell it today, although the word's out. And then I also knew that we needed some sort of proof that what we're doing is effective. So starting like our very first mission in 2020, we would collect data pre and post mission surveys, and it's based on the new GSE scale. And we would measure improvement in self-efficacy, improvement in anxiety, depression, and stress. And
Wow.
so we have those stats from day one, and we publish them annually. And it's pretty shocking. Now, granted, we take them a week before and a week after.
Sure.
And anytime you're talking about statistics or I'm not a scientist, but I know, a week after, the results are not going to be the same 6 months later
Yeah.
if they haven't continued to do the work
Right.
and find other modes of decompression themselves.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, that's kind of how we tackled it. Now, we've had varying degrees of buy-in from agencies. I've had chiefs reach out to me, police and fire, and ask me to take their people. Are they funding it? Hell no.
Yeah.
But at least they're bought in. We
Right.
have been able to get some agencies to put their men and women out on training days. So they're actually getting paid. They're not having to take vacation days, but we're still not to the point to where we have the complete buy-in from agencies, especially in the Midwest or agencies outside of the West Coast that are willing to actually fund it.
Yeah. Yeah. And regarding those surveys, what did you, totally valid what you're saying about, week before and week after, it's like, we don't know what the long-term data says, but do you remember some of the statistics off the top of your head, or like how much of an improvement people were experiencing?
Yeah. Yeah. The when it comes to improving self-efficacy, the questions that we're asking, believe it or not, the veterans and first responders think pretty highly of their capabilities. So we did see some improvement in self-efficacy and reporting. I think that might have been skewed just a little bit. But the things that we really saw was like, 30 to 40% decrease in anxiety and depression,
Wow.
like 28% decrease in stress. So, and it varies year to year, and each group's differently, and they have different experiences. But I mean, like huge chunks, like you wouldn't be able to take, Xanax for a week to feel that,
It's
no sort of,
40%
yeah.
improvement.
I'm
Totally.
not saying talk therapy wouldn't do that, but
Sure.
really experiential um, therapies are where it's at for me. And it's not a long term fix, but I think if they can walk away with some tools like breath work, self-regulation, sleep hygiene, things like that it can be a sustainable
Yeah.
thing. And we've seen it, because I'm still friends with just about everybody that I've taken out to this day.
Right. Yeah, and I think, I want to ask you in a minute, kind of like, what do you think it is about surfing specifically? But, more to the point, I think that it's about finding something when you can kind of distill what is the benefit of surf therapy, then you can realize that, like, oh, there are other things that have this, if it's flow state or whatever the case is. So, but before I ask you, I want to tell you a little bit about how I got into surf therapy and what it did for me. So I got injured while I was in the military, and I was essentially being medically separated. And going through that whole process, coming from a special operations community, you think highly of yourself. You think of yourself as like strong, capable, like, all of this, and your identity is so heavily tied into, where you're at, your reputation, what other people think of you on your team, etc. And all of a sudden, all of that gets called into question. You're losing your job, you're losing your friends in a sense. Your reputation takes this massive hit, and on top of all those like relational issues, you're also losing my mobility. I was sleeping like shit. I felt anxious. I was sad and depressed, that I was like, and surfing was a bit of an escape. It wasn't a pill. It wasn't just another doctor's appointment where I was going in. So I felt like this is fun. This isn't just like, more woe is me, like sick boy going to the doctor. And coming from a amphibious special operations community, I took pride at being capable in the water. This was an element that was most people, you take out first time surfers all the time. They get their ass kicked. What I mean? It could be like a 2 or 3 foot day and like they're like a wet cat, like drowning, you get so gassed. And so that, because it was challenging and because it sort of pushed my limits in a lot of ways, it made me feel like once you could start doing it a little bit, like you got your confidence back and you're doing something that is difficult. It's connecting to nature, and it also has its own aspect of like culture, community, in the same way that like the military does, so for me that was like a hugely empowering aspect of it. And yeah, but I guess now's a good time to kind of segue. Is like, what do you think? What do you think that it is about surf therapy that makes it such a good intervention?
Yeah, well, I think you hit on a lot of the good points. I
Mm,
mean, bringing people out there that have never experienced anything, doing hard shit is good for you,
mm,
whether you like it or not. So that it's not an easy sport to learn, even on a 2 to 3 foot day. Um, it's good to have your ego squashed a little bit, right?
mm,
And it gives you some perspective too. Like you're out in this giant body and you're not in control. You may think you can swim well, but get wiped by a head high, barrel, and it's not necessarily going to be the case.
yeah.
And then it's the fact that we're bringing people and putting them into a foreign environment, and there's some trust that has to be extended.
Mm,
So when you're in that sympathetic state, you're not trusting anybody to do anything. But if you can
interesting.
relinquish a little bit of trust to your surf coach, to me, to bring you out there, and just a little faith that you're going to survive this experience, that's healing.
Mm,
On top of that, you can't bring your radio out in the lineup. You can't bring your gun. You don't have your cell phone. Um, you're given a task that's not an easy one that you don't know how to do.
right.
And if you don't focus on catching that wave, you're not going to catch it.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's, standing up and riding for the first time or just on your belly, either way, focusing on that. And then the physical exhaustion of doing something difficult, learning a new skill, and probably the coolest thing that you mentioned that I have found, and one of our biggest unintended benefits is that building of community. Because a
Mm,
lot of the men and women we take out have that loss, that sense of loss in their community, because most of them are struggling with some form version of whatever letter diagnosis you want to give them.
mm,
And they feel that kind of separation from their community. And
yeah.
then they're surrounded by people that are there for them, or other participants. So that's been really cool. So a lot of that, and there's something about being in the water, being on the sand, being grounded. No financial
Mhm.
worries about why you're out there. They know that SWELL's going to take care of it. So
Yeah.
um, that's really, I think, the highlights of what makes it work for people.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you have any good like anecdotes that you want to share about just crazy transformations that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, you never. I try to get to know participants a little bit, either through Zoom or phone calls or whatever ahead of time, but you never really know the impact unless you stay in touch with some people. I took a guy out that was recommended to me by one of the chiefs, and he was involved in a kind of a crazy shooting. He wasn't the shooter, but he was in charge and directing people to be in certain positions. And one of the people under his command ended up shooting and killing a guy,
Oh, wow.
and it was justified. We don't call them good shootings, but it was a justified shooting.
All right.
And afterwards, the officer that was the shooter ended up quitting, and then he blamed our participant for ruining his career, for putting him in that position. And he held a lot of guilt, that and a lot of other factors. So we brought him out. He's a great dude. Had a good time. We put one of our peer support participants with him to kind of keep an eye on him, and It went really well, and we kept in touch. I didn't really think anything of it until you fast forward a couple years later, and I was at a peer support command school, and I was giving a talk about SWEL, and one of the commanders stood up and he was referring to this participant, and he says, "You know what?" Because I had said, "Hey, we're trying to keep people's jobs." He's like, "Not only did you save this person's job, but I can tell you, you saved his life."
Wow.
And I've heard that from him since then.
Wow.
So we've had a lot of really cool, kind of powerful stories that. Excuse my dog.
No, he's good.
Just needing some pets here. I'm his emotional support human. So yeah, we've had a lot of good success with that. We've had people that we've brought out to SWEL missions that then become therapists themselves or counselors, and then they're referring their clients, I guess we call them,
right,
to us, and we've brought them out, and
wow.
they've been an excellent choice to come out. So it's kind of cool to see somebody go from participant to now healer,
Right.
then referring other people that we can kind of help together. So
right. Yeah, and I'm sure that kind of feeds back into the making this more widespread and allowing maybe the first precinct you go to, or the first that you try to convince to, hey, what do you send some people out, let them know for training, maybe the answer is no initially, or maybe it's yeah for sure, but we're not going to pay for it. But you give it a generation, give it many years and many lives touched by this, and a lot of people that have gone from participants to trainer, I think it becomes that much easier over the long run to actually kind of create that change. Kind of has ripple effects, throughout
sure.
time. Yeah. What's the hardest challenge that you run into for your nonprofit?
Yeah, the need is definitely there. The most difficult thing, is I'm sure you could probably guess, is funding, right?
Yeah.
So trying to determine what would make sense for a donor, whether it be a corporate sponsor, and what their return on investment is. We've done some pretty cool things here lately to kind of put us in a better position to really compete for those dollars. The first thing we did is I stepped back as director, and we put Adam Wright, who's active duty warrant officer in the Coast Guard, in as director. He was a deputy director for a while. He's been with us since the beginning. He's on the West Coast. Great dude. And I'm really excited to see what he's going to do. I'm still on the board, still considered a founder, obviously, and here to help and go surf for sure. And the other thing we did was put a director of development in place that's going out and kind of seeking these donations and sponsorships. So obviously funding's an issue. Participation and finding participants is not an issue at all. I got a whole laundry list of people that would like to go, which is awesome. Because early on, I just was filled with a lot of self-doubt. Like, man, people aren't going to want to do this. This is silly.
Really interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm one of those people that, it took me probably 3 years of doing this for me to really allow myself to feel any sort of satisfaction with what we've done. And that's kind of a shame, because I've let the people down that help support that when I don't, share in the credit of it. So
right. Yeah, what is that process like to find funding for it? Maybe you can stick a high level or go as deep as you want, but how does that work?
I mean, we're always on the lookout for any grants or charitable organizations that put grants out there. Government grants, they don't cover what we do for the most part. So fundraisers too. We hold golf tournaments, raffles, and sell T-shirts. And individual. We've got a whole lot of very giving individual contacts that'll contribute, which is nice. So it's everything. Early on, I would sell a kidney to take somebody on a surf trip.
Yeah.
The first one we ever did, I put everything on my personal credit card and just hoped to God that I could afford to pay it off. And we threw like a gala style dinner at a place called Warhorse for Veterans, that organization I was telling you about.
Yeah.
Thank goodness I was able to pay that off. So
you still got your kidneys?
Still got them.
Yeah.
Still got them, baby. I only need one though, so I've got one of those.
Yeah, you could easily sell.
I can also sell this pup here too.
What kind of dog is he?
He's a Great Dane.
Oh yeah, I can see that.
He's a rescue. He did not have a great start in life, so now he's spoiled rotten.
He's very thankful. let's see. What do you see that is different within the veteran and first responder community? Like, obviously, there are some overlap, but what's a big distinction that you see?
Um, Gosh, I feel like the veteran community is kind of headed in the right direction when it comes to forward thinking on self care.
Mm,
I feel as if a lot of the veterans I interact with are a lot more upfront with kind of talking about things that are going on with them. And the police and fire and medics, not so much. They're still very guarded. It almost feels like maybe the veteran community 20 years ago.
mm,
Um, and I also see that, the traumas are different. It seems like veterans get a whole lot of crap, like in a really short amount of time, depending on, what their job was and when they served and how many times they were deployed. Granted, there are, guys and gals that have been in the military for 20, 25 years in multiple deployments, but generally speaking, it's kind of short spurts of
yeah,
trauma.
right.
And then they're out, and then it's just like, holy shit, like I'm on my own now.
Hmm.
And so it seems like very abrupt.
Right.
Whereas most law enforcement or fire, their careers are a little bit longer, but same result. It's like,
Hmm.
hey, now you're out, and it's like, I retired medically after an injury unexpectedly, much like yourself,
Hmm.
and experienced very similar things that you did with the loss community. I thought I was a pretty popular guy amongst the department, and I don't think it was any stab at me that I don't keep in touch with those people, but it just kind of out of sight, out of mind. So
Yeah.
that
Right.
certainly was an issue as well. So a lot of crossover, but again, there are some kind of intricate differences.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder back to kind of um, possible solutions or other things like, we at least have, well, there's an entire department of veteran affairs. You know what I mean? It's a national organization that sole job is to take care of veterans and their families. There's not really anything like that for first responders, right? It's all pretty atomized, like across the nation. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the retirement systems depends on, what state you're in, what city you're in, because certain
Mm,
cities have their own pension, certain, states have. So it's just, it's so different across the board. Again, I think bringing that back to a national standard to where
yeah.
maybe not a full on type of VA scenario for first responders, but
Hmm.
some sort of resource out there would be great.
Right.
Um,
Right.
I think this statistic's a little bit old, but there for a while, the life expectancy of a cop that retires was like 5 years. He was dead after he retired, or
Wow.
she. Yeah, and whether that be by their own hands or through just poor health, there's just
Crazy.
not a whole lot of support out there
Right.
once you get out. Yeah,
Yeah, there's not even like a term, I guess. Like, if you were in the military and then you get out of the military, you're a veteran. If you were a cop for 5 years and then you're not a cop.
you're called smart.
Yeah, exactly.
Just kidding. Just
But yeah, I think like even just on a cultural level, like there could be simple things like that don't necessarily take into the funding of creating a VA equivalent, but just something that lets people feel like they are still a part of something and that they were, you know, you thank military people for their service. You know, most people don't really thank cops for their service, and especially, it's complicated. I get it when they're in and they're kind of enforcing laws and whatever, but maybe by the time someone gets out, like, I feel like there shouldn't be as much controversy over it, and that is something that was needed to make society function, and doesn't cost much, but I guess just kind of being thankful. Like, I don't know, what do you think? What do you think?
yeah, that's an interesting one. I think the firefighters certainly they have no qualms about wearing their firefighter T-shirts and their stickers and things like that. I know most cops, not all, because you see them out there, but they really don't want anybody to know what they did for a living or what they do for a living.
Hmm.
Especially the last 10, 15 years, it's not exactly the most popular
Yeah.
profession.
Yeah.
So I don't know, public recognition is really, but some sort of system of support
Hmm.
not exactly like the VA, but something out
Right.
there.
Right.
And there's a lot of nonprofits that are doing some killer work that are stepping up, trying to be that transitional support for people, which is awesome. But to me, I think that's something that the government should be funding. That people are giving a lot of themselves, and sometimes losing, breaking up families and certainly damaging people, for their service. So
Right. Right. So we're kind of wrapping up. I guess I have maybe another one question to ask you, and then you can leave us with any sort of parting remarks. But what's your favorite cop movie, if you have one?
oh gosh. I mean, Let's Be Cops is hilarious. It's not really a cop movie. It's like two guys pretending to be cops, but they're not far from the truth. Have you seen
I
that?
feel like I have. It's not very old, right? Let's be cop.
No, it's not.
Yeah, 2014. Oh yeah, yeah. I remember this movie.
They're not far off, man. Some of the stuff that happens there. uh, uh, and I tried to watch this movie again. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. But End of Watch is such a good,
Mm,
like,
I'm familiar with that.
there's some bullshit Hollywood stuff,
Sure.
in there. But I mean, it's a pretty spot on when those guys actually did their homework. And
Yeah.
that was during the era when like everything was cool to be like really rough cut video where everything's shaking. I tried to watch it and I was like,
Throw
I
up.
throw up. Like I love this movie, but I can't watch it. So,
Yeah.
but I think those guys really nailed it when they put that movie together.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I
I gave
just
it two.
saw Warfare. Have you heard of this movie?
Have you seen it? Yeah, I've been. How do you see it? How do you watch it? You have to like buy
Yeah,
it, or
it's in the movies.
oh, it's in the
Yeah,
theater. Okay,
it's in theaters.
how was that?
It's really good, but it's not like enjoyable. I guess if that's, I could see it winning some awards. Like I honestly did not know anything about it. I've seen other Alex Garland movies, and the trailer looks kind of good, but it doesn't really kind of indicate like what the movie's about. But yeah, you could tell kind of the same deal. Like they did their homework. It was supposedly it's basically one sort of mission that happened during the Iraq invasion. It's like a SEAL team and a Marine element are kind of working together, and they go on this patrol, and the it's almost like a documentary reenactment in a sense, pieced together by interviews that they did. So you don't see the interviews, but it was like a reenactment of their memories of like what happened. But just certain shit like the sound of like the machine guns like hitting the walls, like the rounds hitting the walls,
Yeah,
the relative difference in volume between small arms and then like larger fire and IED exploding. It's definitely one that's kind of worth seeing in theaters for that reason is like it's wild. You feel the like explosions like through your body in theaters. But yeah, it's
I guess that could be triggering for some too. Yeah,
oh, for sure. I imagine it absolutely will be because it's also like it's not very Hollywood. Like there's very little like dialogue even in terms of like character development or like the boys shooting the shit like back in the team room. Like it's not really that way. It's sort of like what was happening in this mission after this ID goes off, everyone can't hear. It's kind of that like ear ringing thing, and then at some point you kind of hear as the audience what you're hearing from the perspective of everyone involved, and then you kind of hear it as like the audience, and there's a guy like screaming just like ah, like bloody murder, and you're like whoa dude, like it does not glamorize combat by any means. But yeah, it's a I think it's an important kind of bookend to maybe to our global
yeah,
war on terror. And I don't
yeah.
I think it's interesting because like a lot of military movies, the DoD sanctions a lot of stuff, and it does serve an element of recruitment. You know what I mean? Like active valor specifically was like DoD sanctioned. They were trying to increase SEAL people, applicants, they wanted to fill that pipeline. A lot of movies are that way, where it's like they put this, there's an agenda behind it. Zero Dark 30 was sort of meant to kind of justify and rationalize the enhanced interrogation program, and to be like, see, well, if it wasn't for these, controversial methods, we wouldn't have gotten Sarakawi and blah, 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 and so this one, it's kind of, it definitely doesn't have that same flavor, which is interesting because I go to this like SD MAC, it's like the San Diego Military Advisory Council, every couple months, and they do like breakfast. And I've always wondered while I was in, like what is like the general of this base do, or like of this, like where does he go all day? What's his job? And like this is the type of shit that they do. They go out to these like breakfasts and then just like talk about, very, very high level stuff. But one kind of constant theme is that like there are recruitment challenges. I think pretty much every branch, with the exception of maybe the Marine Corps, has come up short on their recruitment. So they're trying to figure out new ways, like how do we get people to want to join, and I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think it comes down to some of the benefits, dude. Like my life, like while you're in the military, I'm sure it's the same while you're in the cop. Like it's your life kind of sucks. Like it's about 95% not cool shit, and then like 5% like kind of cool shit, and it's this like trauma bonding essentially that just like gets you through it, and like dark humor, but what I've realized since getting out is there really are a lot of benefits for military veterans, and through education and your healthcare and a lot of things that I wasn't even really like aware of when I was joining, and not like I gave a shit anyway. I was in my early 20s, but that type of stuff, like when I talk to people now, I'm like, dude, like let me tell you about the GI Bill. Like let me like it will change your life, man. Like a lot of these things, and a lot of people joining, I'm sure the police and as well the military, it's like it's lower economic brackets. It's people with kind of like, I don't really know what to do with my life. I don't know where to go. And if you could just be like, hey, if you're going to go do this thing, it's serving your country, it's serving your community in some way, shape, or form. And then when you get out, you're going to have, a lot of advantages. I think that's one way of maybe doing it, but I don't know.
For sure.
So Rob, what do you want to leave everybody with? How do you, where can they find you? What kind of events do you guys have coming up? What's the next chapter for the SWEL mission?
Yeah. So, first off, they can go to our website, just recently relaunched. It's www.theswell.org. Next thing on the horizon, we're looking to do a June veterans trip. We're hopefully got that all booked up, ready to go. And then in October, same spot down there at Camp Pendleton, we're doing the military surf competition in conjunction with Pendleton Surf Club, One More Wave, and VSA. So super stoked on that. Future is Adam Wright's going to get this thing going a hell of a lot better than I ever did, and I'm here to support him.
Sick.
I'm blessed that I got to spend 5 years at the helm, meeting people like yourself and Matt, and Patrick Narduli, and just several of your other guests. Just stoked to meet new great people that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to meet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to support your guys' mission on some of the upcoming trips you guys have going on. Set up some coffee and
hell yeah.
Yeah, and if you're enjoying the show and you want to support what we're building, check out Wind and Sea Coffee. You'll get the best tasting adaptogen blends out there and help fuel the podcast in the process. But Rob, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on. This is the Mind Body Mushroom, and check us out.